Hello and welcome to the Flying Reporter Pilot Briefing, your essential guide to changes in general aviation rules and regulation in the UK. Today, proposed changes to the Manchester low-level route, what you should do if you get a carbon monoxide alert in flight, and how an observant air traffic controller prevented a potentially fatal PA-28 crash. This episode of the Flying Reporter Pilot Briefing is sponsored by AOPA UK, the membership association for aircraft owners and pilots. And these briefings are made in association with Astral Aviation Consulting. Astral works for the UK CAA to produce safety content and workshops for GA pilots. Astral is my partner on this project, assisting with the research and technical background, helping me to help you make sense of the ever-changing rules and regulations. So, the Manchester low-level route. It's a corridor of Class D airspace, 4 nautical miles wide between Manchester and Liverpool, which can be transited VFR without a specific controlled airspace clearance, so long as a series of conditions is met. This is a video from a flight through the low-level corridor that I made earlier in the year, and there are a few issues with the route as it currently stands. Firstly, aircraft are limited to a maximum altitude of 1,300 feet, and the route crosses the major conurbation of Warrington. In the event of a loss of control or other emergency, it wouldn't be easy to execute a forced landing without causing a hazard to people or property on the ground. It's also 4 miles wide, and there's no convention on how it should be flown, north to south or vice versa, which does present a mid-air collision risk. Infringements have been a problem there as well. Of around 5,000 flights through the low-level route, there were 75 infringements in its proximity in 2022, almost double that of the year before. Many of these infringements are as a result of pilots not selecting the correct transponder code or listening to the wrong frequency. Navigating the route accurately can be challenging. There are few recognisable ground features, and pilots aren't usually receiving any traffic information over the radio because most of the aircraft using the route are going to be listening to the listening squawk. To be honest, the low-level corridor is a bit of a fudge, a compromise. It's established as a temporary exemption to normal Class D rules. Yes, it allows routine VFR transits through a busy area of controlled airspace, but there's an unconventional set of rules and restrictions which can cause high cockpit workload. Imagine if you were visiting from abroad and intending to fly through the route for the first time. I'm not convinced it would be easy to navigate without falling foul of one of the many conditions. So the CAA has conducted a thorough review. The temporary exemption establishing the corridor expires in May next year, and it's widely believed an alternative solution is required by then. A number of options has been considered, from making the airspace Class G, raising the ceiling, making it Class E, a transponder mandatory zone, establishing alternative routes, and introducing an air-to-air discrete frequency that pilots could use instead of the listening squawk. But in the short term, the CAA has suggested some quick fixes. They plan to make the airspace Class G, with the narrowest part of it being notified as restricted airspace. The restrictions would require aircraft to be flown at an indicated airspeed of no greater than 140 knots and a requirement to operate on the Liverpool QNH. They propose to raise the upper vertical limit of the route from 1,300 feet to 1,500 feet, and they're also exploring the possibility of extending the lateral boundaries of the route south of the M56. Another possibility is that they're going to review visual reference points to see if they can improve those to help prevent infringements. Further work is now going to have to be done to see if this can all be undertaken. You can read all 56 pages of the CAA's review in CAP 2564. Coming up shortly, what you should do if you detect carbon monoxide in the cockpit, and how ATC saved a PA-28 pilot from becoming another controlled flight into terrain statistic. The Flying Reporter Pilot Briefing is sponsored by AOPA UK, the leading membership association for pilots and aircraft owners. AOPA works behind the scenes, scrutinising changes to airspace and aviation regulation, supports pilots when they get into bother, sends out frequent email bulletins covering regulation changes, and also publishes 6 magazines a year. In fact, yours truly features in their latest edition. I talk about how I got into aviation and what my biggest flying highlights have been so far. Right now, Flying Reporter followers can get a 25% discount on new 1 and 2 year AOPA UK memberships. Check out this general offer by using the QR code, clicking the link on your screen, or checking out the link in the video description. So, the silent killer, carbon monoxide. The CAA has been talking a lot about carbon monoxide recently and urging us to carry carbon monoxide detectors in the cockpit. But why all the hoo-ha about it? And what should we do if we detect carbon monoxide in flight? Carbon monoxide is produced by incomplete combustion of fuel, and it can be found in exhaust gases from our engines. If we have a damaged exhaust system or leaks of exhaust into the cockpit, we could be breathing it in, which is not good news. The problem with it is that you can't taste or smell carbon monoxide, and once it enters our bloodstream through our lungs, it starves us of oxygen. In other words, hypoxia, headache, drowsiness, dizziness, impaired vision, nausea, tiredness, confusion, stomach pain, and difficulty breathing. All things that you don't want to be suffering when you're flying. So carbon monoxide poisoning should be avoided at all costs. In fact, carbon monoxide was a factor in the death of footballer Emiliano Sala in a light airplane crash near the Channel Islands in 2019. The first line of defence against carbon monoxide is effective maintenance, making sure our exhaust systems and cabin door and window seals are in tip-top condition. Having a carbon monoxide detector will be the next line of defence, but there are two main types. This is one, it's an active one. It sounds an alarm when they detect carbon monoxide. It is rather loud, as you can hear, but you should hear that over your headset. The other ones are passive ones. They're these ones here, which don't make a noise at all, but just change colour here if they detect the harmful gases. If you're using one of these passive ones, make sure it's still in date, only lasts 6 months. You might need to include a new checklist item, perhaps when you do your Frida checks, so you're actively looking at the colour of the patch regularly during flight to see if it's changed. If you're using one of the active carbon monoxide alarms, will you be able to hear it when it goes off, when you've got your headset on? How will you ensure the battery has enough charge? Can it be secured so that it doesn't present an in-flight risk of detachment coming loose in the cockpit? Maybe these are considerations you might need on a pre-flight checklist. Now, I think most conclude that the active monitors are the best way forward. They are attention grabbing and will alert you immediately to a potential problem. In fact, new technology is already on the market. Headsets with active carbon monoxide monitors are being built in. The CAA has just concluded a 12-month trial on the use of active carbon monoxide detectors in light aircraft, and they've concluded the following things. They say that carbon monoxide is a risk all year round, but a greater risk during cold weather operations when pilots are using their cockpit heaters. They say that domestic active carbon monoxide detectors, like the ones we tend to use in our home, like this one, can function reasonably well at altitudes up to 5,000 feet. But the specific parts per million readings shown on the display here can't be relied upon, as these units are designed for use at ground level, not in the air. Overall, the CAA says that active detectors capable of alerting pilots through oral or visible warnings are a net safety benefit to GA pilots and their passengers. So really, we should all be using them. But let's say you're carrying one of these and it goes off in flight, it deafens you. What do you do then? Well, I asked the team at Astral Aviation Consulting for their thoughts and advice, and this is what they'd recommend that you do in the event of a carbon monoxide alarm activation in flight. First and foremost, don't panic. Fly the aeroplane. Yes, this is a potentially serious, even deadly situation, but you need to make calm, calculated decisions. Next, open fresh air vents, all of them, and windows, and if not windows, perhaps open doors if this is possible and safe to do so. Turn off all cabin heaters. These are often the cause of leaks of exhaust gases into the cockpit. Descend to your minimum safe altitude. There's more oxygen at the lower levels, remember, and we need more oxygen at this point. Find your nearest suitable airfield and divert to it. And if no airfield is nearby, consider making a precautionary landing while you still have the capacity to execute a landing. Perhaps you make a pan-pan call to help expedite your approach and landing to an airfield, or to notify ATC that you're planning on making a precautionary landing off-field instead. Keep a constant check on passengers and also each other. Remember, carbon monoxide can give you a sense of euphoria, can make you feel as if everything is just peachy, when in fact it is not at all. After landing, seek medical attention and ensure the aircraft is checked and any issues rectified before it is flown again. Now, I produced a basic emergency checklist for these steps I've just gone through, which you could print out and keep with your knee board. You can download it from my website for free at www.johnhunt.net. There's also a CAA safety notice on the subject which has just been updated. It has links to useful information. It's Safety Notice SN 2020-003. Finally for today, how an air traffic controller prevented a potentially fatal PA-28 crash. An air accident investigation report was published last month into an incident where a pilot of a PA-28 making an instrument approach into Exeter Airport came within seconds of a crash in IMC. It was only thanks to the actions of an observant air traffic controller at Exeter that the aircraft climbed out of danger. The pilot was making an ILS DME 26 approach into Exeter in October last year, returning the aircraft after maintenance at Biggin Hill. During the aircraft's 100-hour check, the engineers had investigated a reported fault with the aircraft's course deviation indicator. No issues were found apart from the fact that the VOR indicator was 5 degrees out, so this was corrected, but the glide slope was found to be working perfectly. On the positioning flight, which was being conducted in IMC, when being cleared for the approach, the pilot noticed that his glide slope indicator was already in the central position, and so he began his descent believing that he had reached the descent point on the ILS. It later transpired that he'd actually been more than 5 miles from the correct point of descent, as he was more than 12 miles from the runway threshold. 3 minutes after he commenced his descent, the Exeter approach controller queried the pilot's level and then instructed him to climb. At its lowest point, the aircraft came to within 400 feet of terrain, descending at 800 feet per minute. During their investigation, the AAIB inspectors found that the pilot had not confirmed his position on his DME before commencing the descent, a vital step in cross-checking the correct descent point. Furthermore, the approach plates for the ILS DME 26 approach at Exeter state that the glide path should not be used beyond 8 miles from the threshold. The aircraft went around and made a successful landing after undertaking an approach without reference to the glide slope. A later check of the CDI found no fault with the glide slope indicator. The AAIB concluded that there may have been an intermittent defect with the instrument. However, its report also highlighted the need for pilots to make the correct CDI selection on the GNS 430 Navcom, selecting VLOC before using the instrument to display VOR ILS indications. My takeaway: we really must remember to check for red flags on instruments to make sure they are indeed working, and also recognise that it's easy to become over-reliant on glide slope indications, which can, even in ordinary circumstances, show false readings depending on your position and altitude. To read the full AAIB report, search the agency's website for Investigation 28761. That concludes this edition of the Flying Reporter Pilot Briefing. So many of you watch these videos but never subscribe on YouTube. Doing so really helps me, so if you can, hit that subscribe button now. It doesn't cost you anything at all. For some more context and discussion into the points that I've raised in this video, check out my podcast. In the Flying Reporter podcast edition of this pilot briefing, I go into a bit more detail on the issues raised here and share some of my observations and experiences. Search for the Flying Reporter podcast on your favourite podcasting player. The pilot briefing has been made in association with Astral Aviation Consulting. Check out their website for GA safety resources, videos and pilot workshops. This episode has been sponsored by AOPA UK. Don't forget to sign up for that discounted membership offer now. Thanks for watching and fly safely, my friends.